We are here in Rome and we are having this conversation because I think you really belong to my map of the world. I need people like you to help me and us in finding our way in these very dark times. Who are you? I have a list of possible identity definitions. Certainly a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, a woman of a certain age, middle age, from a family living in East Jerusalem. You are many more than that. You are a Muslim, you are a believer, you are a writer. You are a sort of activist in your own terms. You are from Palestine. So I'm trying to arrange a lot of potential definitions, but now I want you to define yourself, because the people who define the other people are the owner of the definition.
I think it depends where and when we make different definitions or identity. Identity is multifaceted and it is dynamic and it changes from one place to another according to context. So if I'm teaching in Palestine, they see me more as a professional psychiatrist, a woman who brings this perspective. If I teach or work outside Palestine, they see me a Palestinian professional bringing a decolonial perspective or lens to the field of medicine and mental health. So it depends on the context, and it is dynamic. And one thing that I would like to bring to this discussion is that sometimes the problem is not only that people define us, try to define us. Sometimes we integrate that definition in a way that when we are harmed in a certain aspect of our identity, sometimes we tend to respond in a way that hyper-proliferates this aspect and make it more visible. And I think this is an issue for many Palestinians because their identity is denied. So they try to bring it up in a way that overwhelms other aspects of their identity. So I'm aware of this trap. Being aware of it does not necessarily mean that I can always escape it, but I try to, this is a question that I keep checking with myself all the time about who I am and what are the aspects of my identity that are more important in this context at this time.
I would like to concentrate as much as we can on your activity, which is in between these different sides. Writer, but also someone who takes care of people in terms of healing, helping, through words, a lot. And it seems to me that words have an incredible power, in a positive and in a negative way. And I would like to elaborate with you as much as we can on this idea of being a psychiatrist and someone who is trying to help making sense in a land like Palestine, but we could say at large, the contemporary world, to make sense in a very dysfunctional situation. How can you help people being functional where everything pushes people towards absurdity, precariousness, nonsense?
Words are very important for every human being. And words and stories are a medium for healing and recovery in my profession. In Islamic faith, we believe that God has honored human beings with their capacity to talk and generate words. And there is a responsibility with that honor. And the responsibility is to use the word in the right direction, to use the word to organize feelings, to organize ideas, and to provide a testimony. And the providing a testimony is an obligation, an ethical obligation. And this overlaps with my understanding of liberation psychology that comes from Latin America. Because testimony can be a tool for liberation, not only for the individual who gives this testimony, but for the person that is implicated in the testimony. So sometimes when we are talking about a community fragmented by oppression and trauma that can freeze their capacity to speak about it, some experiences are unspeakable. If they hear someone composing a poem or telling a story that relates to them, this gives a venue for their feelings. This gives them an outlet to discharge emotions. This is how it helps psychologically. And usually because traumatic events shatter memory and some of the experiences cannot be expressed in words, and when the trauma is collective and different members provide different elements of the story, different pieces of the puzzle, so that helps rewriting history. That helps conserving the historical memory of the people, even if the memory of the person is damaged by traumatic events. So it has a very important value psychologically, and this understanding helps me understand better why a testimony is a moral obligation in Islamic faith.
Of course, I speak from the Western point of view. I am Italian. I became an adult here in this culture, in this language. And so I know for sure that when someone goes to see an analyst, when someone goes to a psychiatrist, words are not necessarily the tool we use. Very often you just act. You act out something. Your body does something. Your body speaks. Which means, and this is my question, how do you get the answer, the question of the body, of the suffering body? Because you have to translate everything from that language into another language.
I would facilitate the translation, and the person will navigate the meaning of the symptom. I believe that when people have less vocabulary and words to express their feelings, they tend to develop more physical or emotional symptoms. For example, we understand that the flashbacks and nightmares, they are the effort of the mind to tell the frozen story of trauma. So when the person can tell the story of the traumatic event that happened to them, they will suffer less from flashbacks and nightmares. The same goes with somatic symptoms, somatization. People who have alexithymia, meaning less lexic, less language to express their emotions, they tend to develop more somatic complaints, more physical symptoms that cannot be explained organically. So, in my role as a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, I help the person realize that these symptoms, who have no organic cause, no detectable organic cause, they tell a story. We explore when did they develop and how, in which conditions, when do they get worse, when do they disappear. we try to make sense of the symptom, understand, listen to the symptom, understand the meaning, and try to help him figure out the story and the meaning and the words behind these symptoms. So sometimes people come with breathlessness, and then much later in therapy they will talk about suffocating experiences. Sometimes they come with impotence, and they talk about loss of control in daily life. People who suffer from humiliation, they might present with... let me give you this example of a man who presented with impotence, and he was treated with all kinds of medications to improve his sexual functioning, and that didn't work. And finally he arrived to a psychiatric clinic where I work. And so after several sessions, he started talking about this humiliating experience where he was forced by soldiers. He was detained by bored soldiers in the middle of the night who didn't find anything to do, so they were having fun. And they started humiliating him. They cornered him near the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he was told that he will not be let go home unless he uses filthy words against his wife, against his mother, against his sisters. And once he started insulting them, he was left to go home. And since that moment, he developed the sexual impotence. So every symptom has a meaning. And sometimes there are many barriers for people to explore and tell us the meaning. Sometimes they are unconscious of the development of the system, of the symptom, and how it relates to certain events in their life. And sometimes they are aware of it, but it is easier to continue talking in the language of physical symptoms rather than a language that describes the reality, especially when the reality is a reality of humiliation or taboos.
Which means, anyway, you have constantly to shift and move between the individual story and the story of a space, of a common space, which is a space which pathologizes, because it's a pathological space fabricated by someone. So how do you move around in between these two dimensions?
Well, both of us are writers, even if we write about different things, but both of us understand that when we write, we try to explain, express what happened to a certain person in a certain context and why it matters. Now, from my point of view as a professional, I see it every day in every face that comes to my clinic, that the structural oppression interacts with the individual predisposition to psychological vulnerability. It interacts and it contributes to the presentation that people bring to the clinic. So, of course, the power structure, domination, is a very important element in my conceptualization. In psychiatry, we talk a lot about the biopsychosocial model. And this model does not take into consideration power dynamics and domination. And we need to understand power dynamics and domination and their influence, the heavy influence on the biopsychosocial model. And in places where power structures are so oppressive and crushing, this component overwhelms and becomes more important than the biological and psychological and the social. The political structure can shatter the social structure and play a very pathologizing role in the life of people in Palestine, but not only in Palestine, all over the world. It depends on where you live, in which context.
On one side, I am very curious to know where you studied in terms of becoming a psychiatrist, practicing there, not. And this is one direction. The other direction is that your use of what you studied and practiced and experienced in your country is now traveling. You are constantly called from Afghanistan, Costa Rica, Australia, Algeria. Everyone needs advice from you nowadays. So the two directions, where did you get your education? And is it useful what you got and how it changes, it's constantly changing according to the situation where you practice your job?
I got my education in several Western institutions or institutions that teach Western medicine and Western approach to mental health and psychiatry and psychotherapy. I finished medicine at Al-Quds University in Palestine, which was established for Palestinians in '94, and I was among the first cohort to join. And I did my years of training during the second Intifada, and I observed how the daily violence, just before my graduation and during my internship, how the daily bombardment in Beit Lahem, for example, or in Ramallah, generates somatic symptoms in people. Somatic symptoms that need psychological intervention, not medications. Yeah. So I learned in Western schools, but I learned a lot from my first-hand experience as a Palestinian living under occupation. And this is precious. And even when I go to different parts of the world, I learn from there. I go as a teacher, as an expert, but I learn a lot from people. And usually when I teach and train in Palestine or outside Palestine, I'm ready to learning from people, bringing examples from their own context. And I'm also open to learning from the patient. Much of my conclusions were lessons learned from the patients. Let me give this example. I observed over the past few months, there were acts of displacing Palestinians from refugee camps in the West Bank. And a nurse approached me to see her father-in-law because she thought he had dementia. But in his case, he was an elderly man. He was a child when the events of the Nakba took place. He moved to Tul Karim refugee camp. He became a school principal. He worked there. And he was healthy and had no reported symptoms until another displacement was imposed on him. Listening carefully to him, I will not explain everything here, but I just want to share my conclusion. Listening carefully to him, what appeared to be lapses in memory that she worried about, he explained to me that this is too much memory that was overwhelming him and made him pay less attention to what's taking place now in his surrounding. Because the second experience, the first time he was displaced, he was under 10. Now he's in his 80s, displaced again. And he told me that he started seeing the images of his siblings when he looks at his grandchildren now. So too much memory not dementia. If we don't pay attention to the events that generated the symptom, we can quickly arrive to the conclusion that he suffers from dementia. If we listen more carefully and elaborate and take the time and make place for people to talk about their political reality, we discover something else. Another example that I also observed over the past 2 years, young people coming with inability to eat and serious weight loss from Jerusalem and the West Bank. One might quickly think that we are talking about anorexia nervosa. Listening carefully to them, they relate the symptoms to the weaponized starvation in Gaza. So this is a new clinical picture. So there is a lot to learn from the patients. If we pay attention, we can consider new categories that are not that do not necessarily fit in Western education, because, for example, these people who presented with eating disorder, with changes in habits of eating in reaction to events in Gaza, I would call them people suffering from disordered eating in relation to the situation in Gaza, rather than usual eating disorder, because the category eating disorder masks the context, the onset, and the reality. So I try to be more detailed in the description and more authentic to the experience of patients.
Which means, anyway, that you are applying your critical thinking in a very radical way to the whole discipline of psychiatry and psychoanalysis, because you are discussing the role and the function of these two knowledges,
of course,
in terms of course, making people adaptable to.
This is one direction, but there is much more to say about this, because we need to examine, we mental health professionals need to examine how our discipline has contributed to violations of human rights, to torture, to colonialism, to racism over centuries. And it's not yet over. It is still being practiced. So in the past, the image of the man who was used by the APA, by the American Psychiatric Association, Benjamin Rush. His name is Benjamin Rush. This man is the man who iconed the term negritude. And he thought at that time that negritude is a kind of leprosy that makes your skin look black and causes cognitive impairment. Psychometric testing, which is a new step, an important event in our field, was used to explain why people of color and Mexicans and Latinos in the US are less capable of governance. And until today, we see mental health professionals using labeling terms for global solidarity with Palestine as neurotic people, for Palestinians in Gaza as sociopaths. For example, a trauma expert, Ayelet Shmuel, she goes to different parts of the world explaining that people in Gaza are sociopaths, and she doesn't feel comfortable living a few kilometers away from them. This discourse paves the way for genocide and extermination. There are endless examples of this kind. Antoine Porot and his followers in Algeria, French psychiatrist, his son and other colleagues, they generated a big, huge body of research that repeats over and over again that North African Muslim population are primitive and infantilizing language, criticizing the motherhood of Algerian women. So our profession, if we don't think critically of it, can be a dangerous tool. It can label people, and it can contribute effectively to a negative representation of colonized people, where they are seen either as barbaric savages or as mentally disturbed people who are inadequate and incapable of governing themselves.
You know, Samah, that this sounds so familiar to me, applied to women, and the use which was made of, especially psychoanalysis, to, in a way, to control the female body.
Yes.
And the female subject, the female agency. So I arrived to your point, being a Western woman, I arrived to your points via the experience of being a woman in the West. I had this image of you during your work like a very open window, very carefully listening, observing, but also foreseeing. So vigilant, careful, empathic. A lot of these things all together, like tools, professional tools and political tools, I would say.
I realize that human beings, including myself, have blind spots and prejudices. Acknowledging that makes me work daily on recognizing them, challenging them, and this gives me a better vision, metaphorically, because I have challenges in my vision. But metaphorically, I think this can liberate me from my blind spots, acknowledging that they exist, and probably also being a Palestinian, denied of citizenship, spending my life growing up and living under occupation, makes me aware of how much prejudice, racism, objectifying people can do harm. So this contributes to my effort to liberate myself from these things. When I am in a position of power, psychiatrists have power, a therapist has power in the relationship. So being aware of how power can blind is an important thing that I think related to my experience of being a Palestinian under occupation. And it makes me see it in many places outside Palestine. It's very relevant to many racialized, marginalized people in the world. Also, I started speaking about my education. I spoke about graduating from the medical school in Jerusalem and then going to France, where I became very aware of Islamophobia. And I felt it on my skin many times. So that also was another layer that helps me see the world. And then not only in France, Islamophobia is much wider than France, but my first encounter, the hardest encounter, I had it in France. So I had to develop my knowledge and ability to understand how it affects the people within the clinical reality, within the clinical context, but people who suffer in the world, even if they are if they don't have symptoms that bring them to clinical attention, but there is a lot of suffering in the world that can be caused by this blindness to racism, Islamophobia, and coloniality.
Starting from here, let's move to the fabrication of prejudices, Islamophobia, racism, and so on. Again, back to language. Language can create poetry, but can create also
domination.
A domination. Same words can make us the gift of a beautiful text, poetic text, and at the same time the verdict of a court. And since in the past days we met words which applied exactly to this double bind system. One, gates, for example. Going around in your country, we kept meeting this new little object on the land called gates by both the Israeli who put the gates on the land and the occupied, which are not able to cross because of the gates. And we were trying to find a word to rename these objects. So I am very interested in this, which is a very interesting political point you keep making, that we shouldn't use the words, the vocabulary of the dominator.
Another blind spot.
Another blind spot. Not easy at all.
To do some justice to words, I don't think that words hurt. I think the hegemonous use of vocabulary and the imposition of the language of the oppressor can harm. And in Palestine we have our share of this, but I think this applies to many parts of the world. So the structures both of us paid attention to are confinement structures that mushroom and are being spread all over the West Bank, closing Palestinians in small pockets. They are structures that close the open air. A gate is built within a wall. It opens opportunities. It leads somewhere. But those are carceral structures. But because the occupation that spread them, now we have around, in the West Bank alone, we have around 905 structures like this, blocking Palestinians in their very small neighborhoods. Lately, around my clinic, 2 gates closed the streets. One in the northern part, the southern part, within an area that is less than 3 kilometers. So it's complete closure.
And we don't speak about checkpoints. We speak about a different invention, a different...
Yes,
because
those are smaller structures, yellow in color. It's like a bar of steel connecting between 2 concrete
blocks,
cement blocks. And they block the streets and impede the mobility of people, creating collective dysfunction of a community. If the purpose of a psychiatric clinic is to help people become more functional, the irony is that it is located in an area, in a neighborhood, that was doomed to dysfunctionality by the decision of the oppressor. And what's worse is to call them gates, falsely. And we need to be careful with the language and call things as they are. So this is one example, the gates. But all what the Western media tells you about self-defense, calling genocide a conflict, talking about the two parties creating false symmetry. This is a language that blinds and maintains the status quo. And we need to start questioning the language that is being used. I'm reminded of the years of genocide in Algeria, where 8,000 villages were demolished completely. And this was done by la police de l'ordre, the police of order, meaning, again, nice terminology
for us
to hide the reality. So we need to question the language and its use, and also question ideologies. You started asking me about definitions and identity, but one tool that helps us as colonized subjects is to de-ideologize the terms, the language, the arguments that contribute to our oppression. There are certain definitions like terrorism, security needs. They spread in media as if people understand them in the same way. Who manufactures this ideology? We need to ask, who does it serve? What does it hide? Those should not be taken, these ideologies and these terminologies and definitions should not be taken as facts. It's not like the law of gravity. The term of terrorism can be questioned.
Yeah.
So questioning and de-ideologization is an important tool of liberation within the clinic and outside the clinic.
And not only in Palestine, I would say.
Everywhere.
But even the term war is very deceiving. The Western media speak about the war in Gaza. Like
creating false symmetry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, but this is the way people are induced to perceive reality. So
yeah.
It's a total manipulation. And it's not so easy to get rid of it. If you should mention now, for me, which are the most dangerous metaphors and words and stories, according to your vision of the current situation, one or two, the most dangerous, the ones you try to undo.
I think the terrorism is one of the most dangerous ones because it can dismiss people and people's aspiration for liberty and freedom. It puts. It can be. This is just a criminalizing term, and you can cover the reality of human right violation with a term like this one. But if I may, my mind is busy with the example that we spoke about earlier. And what came to my mind is another thing that we spoke about, the experience of who creates names. If you remember our discussion about the story of Robinson Crusoe, where this adventurous European man finds himself in an island, and because he discovers it, he appropriates it, thinking that he is the owner of this land. And when he suddenly hears some noise and finds people living, he describes an image of cannibalism. So first, there are no people. Second, if there are people, they are savages, barbaric. So that also gives him a sense of entitlement. They were about to eat somebody, so puff, puff, he shoots.
Before it's too late.
And he saves one of them. And this entity that was saved had no name. He found him on Friday, he calls him Friday. And Friday has no say in this. And then he teaches him something from the scripture and how to pray to civilize him. So this is a typical story of rationalizing colonialism, promoting white saviorism, and maintaining domination, and expecting gratitude and reverence in return. And although this seems like a story from the past, I don't think that we criticize it sufficiently, and still the same attitude is well and alive in our reality and in our world, in the relationship between the hegemony and domination of previously colonial countries in their relationship to the global south. So we have the obligation to start questioning the ideologies, the stories, the words, the language that's being imposed, and that maintains domination and power structure.
And here, of course, it comes out the relationship between the colonized and the good people from the colonizing world, the meaning well people, the people who would like to save you, the white savior. Does he or she exist? So it's a matter of being saved, or it's a matter of finding an even relationship.
Bear with me, because I need to take some time to explain this, because also we don't want to fall into the trap of creating lump sum judgment of everybody. There is empathy and compassion and kindness in the hearts of many people. And there is ignorance. So some good people might be ignorant, and they become racist because they are ignorant and they have many blind spots. But there are others who are arrogant, not ignorant, and they instrumentalize the hegemony of language and the fabrication of ideologies that maintains power. And in order to liberate ourselves from this reality, we need to be able to see the difference between these different people. So the arrogant people continue to despise our culture and where we come from, and project their racism upon us because of the color of our skin, because of the dress code, because of the values, the different value system that we have, while in reality they speak to us from a higher moral ground, and in many cases this moral ground is based on a mountain of dead bodies, of skulls, or a moral ground that is based on wealth and power that was created due to the very uncivilized acts they did when they colonized countries from the global south. It's not an easy thing to distinguish between the two, and to, on the one hand, maintain and nurture a fabric of humanity with other people, and making the effort to connect to them and to contribute to shedding a light on the blind spots that they have. I'm willing to do this with ignorant people. But I'm not willing to waste my efforts with arrogant people. And I make a lot of effort to try to see the difference.
You are invited very often to different countries. How do you select? Not select is not the right word. How do you spot people you can reciprocate and people you can trust?
It's not an easy thing because you might find it in certain individuals, but we need to also understand the mindset of the institution or of the larger public. And while people might seem informed about the situation in Palestine, I encountered many of those people. They are ignorant about their own history of colonization. And sometimes it is the cognitive dissonance that prevents them from taking responsibility. Or they are kind and empathic and they know and they want to do something, but they don't know something other than white saviorism, where they want to deal with the situation as if it is a humanitarian crisis and people need charity, or we need to help some people to come into our country and take care of them. I think even I understand at the same time that each person has to do what is within their capacity, while acknowledging that the situation needs more. But doing things that are irrelevant, that helps them shed the feeling of guilt, without acknowledging the political aspect of the reality, is problematic. For example, I keep bringing this ironic example of the dignity kits that the international community sends to Palestinians. And what they mean by dignity kits is hygiene kits for women. They send them sanitary pads and soap. Maybe they don't send anymore, but that was trendy at sometimes. So some countries and some institutions that send military aid and diplomatic aid to Israelis, they want to send Palestinians hygiene kits, dignity kits. They call them dignity kits. So they impose their conceptualization of dignity on the Palestinians. We have a different concept of dignity. It's not the hygiene kit. It's not reduced to hygiene only. Dignity is much larger and wider. And the dignity that we observe in Gaza can be exported to many parts of the world. So false charity can be problematic. I think that for me, when I talk to people, one way to develop trust is to see how much they know about their history, their contribution in coloniality, because this is a plague in the world. Even if your country is not implementing it directly now. For example, Italy is no more in Libya, or in Albania, or Somalia was another country. But they
are still there in different ways.
But still you have your share in the petrol.
Exactly. It's another way.
In Libya. So even if it is not practiced like it was practiced in the past, I think also you need to do your revision, your action of retrieving historical memory and how it influences decision-making and diplomacy and relations today. One way to deny their responsibility is assuming that what is in the Middle East stays in the Middle East. What's in Palestine is very far and it doesn't touch us. But Palestine has global reverberations. It has global importance because it is a litmus test for international human rights and international law. It's the litmus test for the credibility of the supposed superior ideology and moral ground of the West. Also, what happens in Palestine will determine the future of the world. In a way, if one country, the latest of European colonization, was allowed to do what they are doing over 2 years in Palestine, and they are still being given the green light to continue what they are doing, why wouldn't that be repeated elsewhere? And what would be your response if some survivors of this unprecedented inhumanity, what would be your pretext if they resort to very radical ways of fighting against those who enabled the genocide? So even though it seems to be distant and far, I think it will have repercussions.
Can you tell us more about the repercussions of the Palestinian experience and trauma on other places in the world, both from the point of view of a psychiatrist, someone who deals with mental health, and from the point of view of a writer, of a witness who, and then we have to speak a bit about the way you write, meaning not only about what you write, the contents, but also the style and the speed of your writing. Okay. I am very interested in both these dimensions. But let's start from the repercussions.
I explained earlier why Palestine matters or should matter to different parts of the world. So for many people who were colonized in the global south, they see the faces of their ancestors in our eyes. And the rest of the world, the Western world with colonial history, they contributed to establishing the entity that is occupying Palestine. And while they wish to deny their colonial history in the global south, they cannot claim that they don't see acts of genocide in Gaza. No. So it matters. And there are reactions that can be expressed in problematic psychological language, talking about trauma and PTSD and vicarious trauma. Why is it problematic? Because it doesn't differentiate between the act of the event of a car accident and historical colonial trauma. So a trauma of a car accident has a clear beginning and a clear end, and it is accidental. Colonial trauma is continuous, chronic, cross-generational, collective, and above all, it is intentional. The fact that it is intentional makes the impact much worse. We know a lot about what works in an earthquake, in treating the people impacted by the trauma of an earthquake, which is also collective. But the earthquake has no intention to break your will, to damage your agency, to impose helplessness on you. Colonial trauma has all of these objectives. And there is also a little difference between historical trauma and colonial trauma, because historical trauma like slavery and the Holocaust, the chapter is over. Colonial trauma, the bleeding continues. There are events on the ground until today. It has this aspect of being historical because colonization doesn't take place suddenly. There is history. But the wound is still open and generating masses of affected people, but more importantly, damages the social fabric, the connection, the trust, the self-esteem, the self-concept of the colonial subjects. And I want to give a painful example that comes from the experience of historical trauma and how it affects people, even many years later. Of course, colonial trauma has more damaging effects. You probably noticed that in Palestine and also in other countries with experiences of colonization, people fear dogs. Do you have any explanation for that?
Yes.
I was alarmed by how many people in Palestine fear dogs, and I didn't realize that until I started going outside Palestine and see how people from the West, they like dogs and they speak very positively about them, and they are so astonished when they see people of color frightened from dogs. Very few people in the world know the history of French, Spanish, and American colonization use of dogs, training them to devour black skin in Jamaica, in Haiti. Dogs, Cuban dogs, were trained in a very sophisticated way to devour black skin, and there were shows to intimidate the population. Shows where the general public would watch a dog devouring a man until they reach the bone, cutting him into pieces, black man. And there is an important document written by Sarah E. Johnson, about this matter, quoting from a letter of a French general to a leader of the French army in Haiti, telling him, I will send you Cuban dogs, feed them black men. So that's a very gruesome picture. But in Palestine, dogs are trained to attack people. Even it's a less known of story, but it's a true story, and those who are interested can check it. The dogs, military dogs, are trained to sexually harass prisoners. So this will not impact only people who live this experience. It will impact generations that will follow. I read also some comments from protesters in the US saying that the dogs are racist. And then there was an explanation that the dogs try to implement the wish of the people who take care of them, the white police. So this is a symptom that can be looked at in a very simplistic, reductionist way, where you see that, okay, there is this kind of phobia, or they are less pet-friendly, or you can attribute it to Islam and its attitude towards purity and dogs. But there are more important elements that we need to understand them if we understand something about the history of colonialism.
When you were talking about this experience in Cuba, Haiti, and Jamaica, I was thinking about Algeria during the War of Independence, when the French army was using smoke to kill the resistant people who were hiding in caves. And so there was one, especially general, very famous for his ability in putting wood and fire at the very entrance of a cave where he knew that people were hiding, and he was using this very harsh terminology, kill them with smokes, like we do with foxes. So
That's also in the prescription book of colonization. You need to dehumanize, to treat people as insects or animals in order to legitimize, to minimize the cognitive dissonance of the perpetrators. So in the history of the occupation of Palestine, there is a big dictionary of language, dehumanizing language, that has been used against Palestinians, calling them cockroaches, animals, beasts on two legs. We heard it at the beginning of the acts of genocide, like those are human animals. It's been used a lot. Again, Ayala Chekid, the minister of, she was a Knesset member at that time, but later she became a minister of justice in Israel. She incited against the killing of women and children, saying that the Palestinian women in Gaza are snakes and their children are little snakes. So I think every colonization uses a dehumanizing language to make it possible to eradicate.
Samah, very often you are associated in terms of your work to Frantz Fanon, very often.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I was rereading everything by Fanon, and I would like you to tell me more about this relationship, because yes and no. So I would like to know more about the yes and the no, and why.
I don't make this association myself, people make this association. But there is no doubt that the writings of Fanon are a great inspiration and an important reference for me. Most importantly, because the contemporary mental health institutions try to dismiss any politicized voice in our field. So to have in the background people like Frantz Fanon, Ignatius Martin Barrault, and Paulo Freire, this is important for me to feel validated in thinking outside the box, outside the categories, bringing the political reality in my conceptualization of the work that I'm doing. So I want to acknowledge this. I wonder why Fanon didn't say something about Palestine, or nothing was reported about Fanon's interest in Palestine. It's a little bit puzzling because he was moving between Algeria and Tunisia. People there are interested in Palestine, and he didn't say anything about it. And it was around the same time when Che Guevara and Malcolm X visited Palestine, and they had declarations about Palestine. So that is a question in my mind. And I remember writing a chapter about this in a book about Fanon. And by the end of the chapter, I wrote how I imagine him speaking about Palestine if he were to live in our circumstances. So that's one difference. And the other difference is related to lack of acknowledgement of Islamic ethics in contributing to the revolt of the Algerian people against the French colonization. That was completely missing. So he has his analysis of the situation, which is geographical class, rural versus urban, but he ignored completely the aspect that relates to the Islamic ethics, even though the people who revolted against the French, they call themselves mujahideen, which is a word that is very important in Islamic ethics.
He was very French.
I don't want to speculate why it was like that, but those are two important observations. We know his wife, at least, Josie. she was more interested in Palestine, and I think she had a reaction to Sartre's position on the occupation, that on his support of the expansion of the occupation of Israelis in 1967.
Let's go back to the point of your writing. You write a lot. You write and you publish in, let's say, scientific magazines. You are a very respected psychiatrist and psychotherapist all over. But then you write another kind of writing. You write articles.
Yeah.
You write like on-the-spot articles. For example, one of my favorite ones is the one about solastalgia, which is, in Italian, it's solastalgia, not nostalgia, solastalgia. But then, and you write in a sort of urgency. You need to say something now about this, which is taking place now. So you are not commenting upon, or you are not speaking about the future.
Yes.
Now, here. And that affects, of course, your style, because it has to be a very fast, very full of stories, some metaphors. So I would like you to tell us more about your relationship about this very different
To
things.
put it in a very simple way, I would say I have 3 different styles of writing. The most boring is scholarly journals. Because it is so time-consuming, and you have to deal with the bureaucracy of journals and usually I like to do it with another colleague. I don't like to take care of the footnotes and the application and being a corresponding editor. So, and I'm full of appreciation for my colleagues who share this kind of writing with me. And I want to acknowledge Elizabeth Berger and Maria Elbish. I write a lot with them. To finish with this thing, already I have an important critique regarding medical journals and all journals and the synthesis of science and epistemological injustices that keep our knowledge in the shadow. And I make the effort to write scholarly things because I try to bypass all the obstacles and barriers that dismiss the knowledge from Global South and from Palestine as well. So that's not the most interesting area for me. I also write in Arabic for Palestinian public a lot, mainly in Al-Quds newspaper, but also in other outlets. And I write about issues that matter to the Palestinian community that are related to social justice issues, like topics on topics that relate also to my field in psychiatry. Matters related to superstitious attribution of mental health problems, honor killing, corporal punishment as a way of discipline. And I speak a lot to Palestinians about these matters. The third part is my writing for media, Western media, English, mainly English newspapers or magazines. And I usually write this to organize my feelings and my thoughts in reaction to something that touches me deeply, related to the political reality or related to my clinical field, and I see the connection between them, and I try to explain the connection between them. And usually when I observe something like the gates, the so-called gates, the carceral structures, I get triggered. I get angry. And it provokes my mind, and I start writing in my mind while driving. And in order to settle and be able to sleep, I need to put this on paper, usually on my phone. I write on my phone now. So most of my writings are that are published in media and later in books as essays are reactive to an observation or an encounter or an interaction that provokes me emotionally. And I try to make sense of it. So it has the emotional component and the synthesis of meaning, of the events and the emotion.
Very rarely you are autobiographical. Very rarely, I noticed in your pieces. Clearly you react, so that's an autobiographical element. But very rarely you speak about yourself.
Already I'm overwhelmed with what I observe. And my writing, in a way, is my practice of the ethical and professional responsibility of providing testimony. So I prioritize people than my own stories. There will come a time, I hope, in which I will write more about myself. But I think that even when I talk about the political reality or other people that I encounter, I share what is necessary about myself that will explain my lenses, why I see things as they are.
But that's writing, in fact. The act of writing is such a subjective. Of course you write from your point of view, of course. And that's why I am very interested in, because you have a very specific voice in this, let's say, so-called instant writing, which is not instant at all. So when you sit down with your telephone, the piece is like dictated by that self who was driving the car few hours before.
By triggering encounters, yes.
Yes.
And I have to say and express my hope that I will have time to write all what is going on in my mind and all the stories that remain in my floating attention to the reality. Because I feel that this is a responsibility, and I feel that they will help people see more. This will help generating knowledge from Palestine, a knowledge that comes from a very troubled place, but yet it is relevant and it can teach important wisdom to different parts, to different people in the world.
Can we also add the element of pleasure? Because one of the things I think are missing in the Palestinian discourse is that, like, duty wins on pleasure. There is a pleasure, there is a clear pleasure in your writing. There is a pleasure in the writing of it. And the other thing I notice a lot in your writing is that you have an incredible sense of humor. The fact itself that you pick certain things in the landscape, not other things, and you elaborate on that. So if you could tell me more about this, the pleasure of writing, which is not only a duty. There is nothing wrong in pleasure, in my opinion.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I think it's a very important source to deal with reality.
Exactly.
To try to maintain this human capacity of creating humor. It's a very healthy defense against all the horrors that we witness.
And also, I mean, we were talking a lot about the fact that, especially in the Western countries, we have a tendency to confine you in certain figures, let's say, in certain representations. Pleasure is never around. So it's a very narrow way of representing Palestinians, and not now, since a while. Terrorists, heroes, you are more than that.
I think people fail to see the pleasure and the humor of Palestinians because maybe it is expressed in a different way than yours. So maybe it's a cultural difference, or maybe because they assume that all Palestinians are in tragedy, and tragedy is what is expected to be communicated. But I have to say that pleasure is not the element that, the lack of pleasure is not the element that bothers the most. I think the element that bothers the most in the subjectivity of Palestinians or in how Palestinians represent themselves in the world is that they have a politicized approach to tragedy. Western media tends to be attracted more and willing to uplift more the voices of depoliticized tragedy that doesn't ask questions that bother. And if there is another thing that characterizes my writing, I think that I ask questions that bother. Yeah. And I bring aspects, I try to point to the blind spots. And I think this bothers.
Completely. You don't fit in the normal representation.
There is nothing deliberate that I do in order not to fit. It's simply being authentic. When you try to be who you are, you don't fit into any category. People need categories in order to simplify their understanding of the world. So they need to eliminate many other things. If we are true to ourselves and bring all the complexity of who we are, if we don't try to please and appease and be accepted, then it is difficult to fit us into one category.
I would like to close here our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.